Welcome to the Strange Story Podcast, where we talk about all things strange and unexplained. On this show, I talk to people you may know from paranormal television shows, as well as experts and authorities in the field, and we take deep dives into some of the really strange, weird, bizarre, and, of course, unexplained things that take place. Today on the show, I've got Jack Osbourne from Travel Channel's Portals to Hell. Now, I'm really glad that I got Jack on the show and was very excited to do this interview because Jack has done a lot of things in the paranormal world, not just Portals to Hell, but he was on other shows. He's also a prolific producer. So for me, I get to speak with somebody who not only knows how to make television shows, has an interest in the paranormal, but also has gone to a lot of cool places. But in this age of COVID-19 production, there is always something going wrong with recordings. And unfortunately, with my recording with Jack, the audio is really messed up. Fortunately, it's mostly messed up on my side for a majority of it. And not as much on Jack's, but still, it's not the best recording. So I'm going to apologize up front for this. And normally, if this was anyone else, I would just say, somewhere down the road, when there's time, let's redo it. But Jack is a very busy guy, and I really wanted to get this interview out. So I did the best I could to sort of clean it up, and I'm going to put it out there for you. Now, in this episode, we talk about Portals to Hell, obviously, a couple of his creepy experiences and places he's been. He also showed me a piece of evidence that has now aired from Iron Island, the Iron Island episode. And I will also show that clip as video on my YouTube, on my Facebook. But we talk about it here, but obviously I'm not playing the clip because it's, this is a podcast, it's audio, not video. So we do reference it, we do talk about it. If you don't know it, I will do a separate follow-up video where I show it and talk about it with Jack. So that's one thing. The other is, Jack has also been to one of my favorite places that I've never gone on Earth, Skinwalker Ranch. And we did get to talk a little bit about Skinwalker Ranch. And it's funny because a lot of the conversation, whether it's about Skinwalker Ranch or other things paranormal, if I can, I like to turn it towards science and especially the science of the unexplained. So we got to talk a little bit about that, and that was very exciting for me. And we talked, of course, about other things that happened at Portals to Hell and Jack's personal interests in the paranormal. So instead of a long preamble and conversation that I normally do, I'm just going to jump right to it. I've had to cut it down again because of the quality of the audio, so it's not a long interview, but because it is Jack and he's just a phenomenal guest and paranormal talent, I'm just going to jump right to it. So this is my interview with Jack Osbourne from Travel Channel's Portals to Hell. Congrats on all the success with Portals to Hell. Such a great show, especially the way it looks. And
Thank you.
I've been doing paranormal television for practically 20 years, but obviously, like you've been interested in it a long time. But just it's such a great look. The mixed media, the format, the transparency. So I have to say I really enjoy the departure it is from the other regular paranormal shows on television. So I think it looks fantastic. Yeah. Speaking of producing shows, I don't know how much people know, but aside from being on shows, you've produced a lot of stuff, right? Film, television, going back, very prolific producer, even back to Alpha Dogs and before that.
Yeah. I've been producing now since 2010, so 10 years. Yeah, so a lot of stuff. And and the funny thing is, when you produce reality, 90% of what you produce never makes it to air. So it's like this really unfair algorithm where people are like, oh, you've done a few things, and you're like, well, yeah, and then 60 pilots that never made it to air for networks because they can never make a decision. But yes, I have produced a lot of stuff.
I can tell, I'm sure the audience can tell, when there's someone who knows the craft, who's also on the show and really running the game in so many ways. I'm sure that attention to
the craftsmanship of storytelling is what influences.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah, and it does absolutely. It my team and I really can't take credit for a lot of the story narrative, because I learned very early on when you're hosting a show and if you're really in the kitchen with the chefs, it can just get too much. And so a lot of this really is, my other EPs, which is, Pete Glowski and Elaine White, they really are, masterful at finding the story and the chaos of our investigations. Because sometimes it's not so clear cut.
How many episodes and how many locations have you done on Portals to Hell so far?
So between season 1 and season 2, we've done 19 investigations, and we have 7 more to do.
Okay, so 19, and you've done, obviously a lot of other paranormal stuff prior to this. What's the creepiest place you've been to? Just location.
Man, I think there's like different categories. Like Skinwalker Ranch is hands down one of the weirdest, creepiest, just strange energy places I have ever been to. And then there's places like, I guess like Trans-Allegheny had an incredibly interesting interaction with something there, which I to this day can't quite figure out. Like I'm choosing to paint it with that was an intelligent spirit communicating with us. It could have been something else, but I can't figure that out. And then there was places like on this season we went to the Hill House in Mineral Wells, Texas, and that place was absolutely terrifying. Like I had the feeling like if we had stayed there for if you moved into that house, you would go insane.
That's probably true of a lot of these places, right? I mean, Skinwalker Ranch is a place I've been fascinated with since George Knapp's book. 15 years ago. And it's funny because earlier I had Travis Taylor on and we were talking the science of sort of portals, funny enough, and if that's kind of what's going on at Skinwalker Ranch, and it's the kind of place where for 15 years since reading that book, I've tried to make a show out there. Of course, at the time Bigelow was there, nobody could get in. I like that it's finally happening, but I don't think nobody goes there and comes out saying that place was fine.
I totally and I've never been to a place where literally every single local you talk to has either seen a UFO, had a Bigfoot encounter, seen skinwalkers. Like everyone has had an experience there. And I'm like, well, not every single person here can be totally full of shit.
Yeah, the whole Uinta Basin. And there's people you talk to and they're like, no, I don't believe in any of that stuff. I don't believe in any of that stuff. And you're like, look, this one time this thing didn't happen or I saw this. And that's everybody's stories.
Totally. And that is what has by far made it hands down the creepiest place. And it's not just the ranch, like to your point, it's the entire basin. And that's what frustrates me. Everyone's like, oh, well, did you get on the ranch? We're like, well, no, you don't need to get on the ranch. Like if you were to just go there for 2 months just to investigate stuff, you were going to find a whole laundry list. I mean, I was talking to someone who had seen giants on his property. And then someone that was like encountering puckwudgies in the forest. It's just like, you're like, wait, what is happening?
I'm surprised you didn't mention the Shanghai tunnels with the full body apparition. Is that your wildest experience you've had on the show?
And I'm sure you've experienced this. Like what you kind of get desensitized to the crazy when you ghost hunt a lot. Like what could be like, whoa, like that's insane. Like eventually you're like, like was that my mind playing tricks? I mean, I'm still racking in my head about that investigation because I'm like, well, could what I saw have been, a bright light being shone in my eyes and now I'm kind of, get that imprint. I'm pretty damn sure I saw a woman off to my left with long blonde hair and it wasn't our producer. But I am, Katrina and I like to say we're very, we're pretty centrist and we lean a bit towards being skeptics. Like we're very, we poke through a lot of our evidence and try and find the faults. So I don't know. It was, the thing for me is that I didn't have that crazy gut fear the whole time I was in the tunnels. There were times where it would come up. So I can't really say it had the same feeling as, the Hill House or Iron Island, where you just, the whole time you're like, I'm terrified.
What got you all into this? Was it the experience you had that I saw on Celebrity Ghost Stories, back home in England? Is that how you got interested in all this paranormal stuff?
Yeah, it was, to be honest with you, what really got me into it was X-Files. Like I was, that was my generation, like as a kid, like every weekend I was watching X-Files. I think it was on Sunday nights on Fox. And I was hooked to that show and die hard, watched however many seasons there were. And that got me into reading about UFOs and Bigfoot and cryptids and ghosts. And then I had that experience because it was right around the same time I was really into X-Files, about 10 or 11, at the house in England. And it always been kind of my little geek out, because I was super nerdy as a kid. So it was just like, all right, this is kind of nerdy and fun. And, and I had my other nerd friends that were all into it too. And so it was just kind of my thing.
That's funny. I was the same way. I would prefer staying home watching science fiction movies and television than going out as a kid. Portals to Hell. How does all of that? How do you do you say I'm just focusing really on the spirits, or because it's really you have the word right in there, portals? Does it allow you to kind of go deeper into what is a ghost and what is the paranormal, versus just focusing on like the ghost hunting, so to speak?
Yeah, I think having during season 1 we were very much literally looking for these kind of air quote portals, and we realized that yes, there are a lot of places where there could be some kind of driving force that's instigating whatever kind of paranormal is occurring, but at the end of the day it's kind of limiting, because if you go to places that just feel haunted and there's no portal, you're kind of like and so it's more of like going into season 2 we've kind of lightened up a little bit with what our criteria are for investigating. It's yes, we always like to ask the question, could there be a portal here? But mainly the 2 reasons we'll go somewhere are, is it a terrifyingly haunted place that's been investigated a bunch before but is still terrifyingly haunted? All right, we'll go there. And 2, has it ever been investigated before? And that's kind of the umbrella we operate under. A lot of the places we will go into investigate that you've seen 20 times on other shows, it's because there's been an uptick in activity. And so that's like kind of enticing for us, because we're like, all right, what's causing that uptick? Is there a portal?
That's got to be a lot of fun, right? Because you get to do the traditional hunting, but also you get to take that next step of, well, beyond there's activity here, what's causing it. And like we talked about, the idea of portals, I just think is really valuable. It's it's progressive and it's sort of an emerging idea in the field. So what else is coming up? What are you excited about? What can you talk about in the episodes coming up?
We can't. Iron Island. We had some amazing results during the investigation. Truly awesome place. It didn't necessarily feel super evil or demonic or anything, but very active. Like I said earlier, the haunted Hill House in Mineral Wells, Paulding Jail, which already aired, but then we're going into Thomas House, which is kind of a legendary place in Red Boiling Springs, Tennessee. In that place, it was wild. Like I actually think it was, when you do, invariably there's always hot button words in the paranormal TV world, and like as of late, elementals have been one of like the new new descriptive terms for entities. But we brought Michelle Bellinger with us on this investigation. We actually legitimately think that there was some kind of ancient elemental entity there, just by the nature of like what was going on. And we were having weird animal stuff happen, like herds of deer would like come running across the road when we were driving around, and just animals just popping up all over the property, and it was just weird, creepy place.
I love the weirder the better, right? The stranger, the creepier for this kind of stuff. It's just really the stuff that makes you say that makes no sense, or I've never seen that before, or I really the head scratchers.
Totally.
And speaking of which, what do you have, like that one story, that weirdest, strangest, crazy experience that you've had that just stands out above all else?
Oh man, you know what? It might have come from it. It's a couple things. It's the experience we had at I guess there's filming the show and then there's non-filming the show.
Right.
I think filming the show, it was the stuff that happened at Trans-Allegheny, the stuff that happened at Thomas House, and not Thomas House, the Haunted Hill House and Iron Island. Like those three things while filming, those three locations to me, I had irrefutable things happen with pieces of, like, we have actual tangible evidence. Like, we captured this using an instrument and it's unexplainable. The thing the incident that happened at Iron Island was we had a flashlight in the middle of the room that we had literally purchased an hour before the investigation. I put the batteries in myself. It was a brand new flashlight bought at a hardware store. We set it in the middle of the room, and Katrina calls out to whatever spirit was there and was like, if you're here, turn that flashlight on. And that flashlight turned on. And I cannot explain how or why. And if it did turn on for some faulty wire, why did it only turn on when we requested for it to turn on? It was truly just unlike anything. I was like, I about did a backflip out of the room. It's crazy.
What do you think that is? Even if you can't prove it, what's your working theory of how or why or what that is?
Okay, so for me, I kind of put it under three categories. I do very much believe that a majority of hauntings are residual energy. I just think it's humans making an imprint on the environment that we're in, and that energy is just echoing and bouncing around the walls of, that building or, across the land that it's on. That's one. And I think that is a very, very common occurrence with hauntings. The second part is I do believe that, kind of talking about what we were discussing earlier, about an unknown energy spectrum that is causing us to experience hallucinations, auditory hallucinations, having strange feelings, not too dissimilar from how people that live under power lines, they get headaches, migraines, nausea, things like that. I guess actually I'm going to add a fourth category to this. I do believe that environmental toxicity is leading a lot of people to believe that places are haunted. Magic mushrooms are a mold. So why can't some old decrepit, buildings have toxic mold that's going to make you hallucinate? Like, that is one thing. And then I think a very, very small select, category of hauntings are legitimate, interdimensional, intelligent entities. But I think it's much rarer than people believe it to be.
So you think that the light coming on was one of these rare interdimensional entity opportunities?
Yeah. Yes.
And so when you say that, you're not necessarily talking about then, dead Uncle Jimmy. You're talking about an intelligence that's not here that could be anything? Or do you believe it's related to that environment?
Man, I think it depends, you know.
In that case, with that specific one.
With that specific one, I believe it had something to do with the location because Iron Island used to be a mortuary. Like they used to put, that's where they used to be a funeral parlor. So they would embalm bodies there, and people would have they would have their funeral services, they'd have the wakes and all that there. So for me, that felt like, maybe there is, that intelligent spirit here or interdimensional entity or whatever, because I tend to kind of, terms ghost and spirit, I think they have a certain level of novelty attached to them now, so I kind of like the idea that this is, they're not in our realm, and maybe they're in another realm and they have the ability to bounce back and forth. So I kind of, I think when you say interdimensional, I think it doesn't have a lot of the jovial, like Halloween-y, connotations attached to it.
Right. Well, it's harder to visualize when you say that. It sounds clinical and science, in so many ways, and less emotional, less experiential. And I think that's why people prefer the word ghost. But the language has to develop, right? I mean, the word ghost has been around for a long time, but understanding of what they are has evolved. And I always, so the reason I asked that is about that location is, have you been to a place or come across a place where, like that, you'll have some activity, you can possibly relate it to something historical or a person, people was historical, but does that discount the possibility that whatever it is preceded those people? Again, kind of going back to spaces and locations being the portals for activity. So even though such and such guy blew his brains out in the living room of his house, who's to say that there wasn't something before him there, and maybe it even contributed to that. And trying to say, let's connect beyond that.
Yeah, absolutely.
With that.
I mean, that absolutely could, but I think that's when it falls into the, residual. Like, is it actually a consciousness, or is there a high volume of this interdimensional energy there that is playing things in a loop? And could it actually be that guy's intelligent spirit is not there, but there is a level of his consciousness which is stuck there because of this energy loop? And to us, it might appear intelligent, but on like a quantum level, it's not. Like that, and that's what I think that's when things get really confusing, because you're like, is it residual? Is it intelligent? For me, that's when I like to rely on our psychic mediums that we use. Michelle Ballinger, Cindy Kaiser, and some of the other fantastic people that have come on the show. And we don't tee them up with any information, and 99% of the time they don't even know where they are in the country other than the airport that they flew into. And so when you bring Michelle into Trans-Allegheny, and she has no idea where she is, she's completely blindfolded the entire time, and she's telling you the color of the room she stood in, and it's pitch black, and she's got a blindfold on, you're like, okay, I'm willing to open up my kind of belief radar here and lean into the fact that she's telling me, no, this is where the girl hung herself, and she did it because of X, Y, and Z.
I keep like the flashlight thing, and it just fascinates me, right? Because there's a lot of things working here, right? You've got location, you've got an electrical device that it does something and doesn't do something, and the thing it does not do is turn on by itself. And then you've got this activity, but then you've got the call to action, right? The sort of the communication. And one thing I've learned in doing all of this that, I didn't understand early on, which I'm sure you and obviously everybody else in your field knows, is the idea that you have to teach when you're interacting with how to interact with you. And the flashlight, it seems so simple, I think, to so many people, but it's also very clean. Everyone is so far away from it, and obviously, we know it's not walkies, it's not, context IFBs, it's not mics, it's different things. Like that is wild. So, what intrigues me about that the fact that you and Katrina are on opposite sides of it.
Yeah.
And it's something I always wondered. Is it, are you creating a line,
Yeah.
between the two of you for that?
Totally. I mean, there was 4 people in the room. We had our 2 camera guys, Scott and Addison, and then myself and Katrina. And I wonder if collectively our consciousness kind of all clicked in and created some kind of, electrical jump.
It gets back to that consciousness, and that's, subatomic, and that's what quantum theory is amazing. One day when it's not theory, it's observable, it'll be really interesting. I think it's going to turn us all in our heads.
Right.
That is probably one of the most interesting, pieces of activity that I've seen, because it's, again, like I said, it's so clean. You can't say, there's no like, well, is it a flashlight? Is it a light or not a light? Is it a reflection? No, like it's clearly the light coming on command, and no one at it. So that's
and that doesn't get more raw than that. That's literally pulled from a security camera, and so it's a really, that's why Iron Island for me was like, I mean, hands down, one of the most badass investigations I've been on.
Well, that sounds like a place that I think I would probably like to check out.
Yeah.
And there's only a few places that I'm like, look, Penhurst, I would not have gone there if not for the show, because, it's just, I don't know, I like to keep a little bit of distance sometimes from some of the places that are just, there's so much agony and pain that took place there. I don't generally like those types of places. I've been to Alcatraz on different, overnights for the shows more times than I would like to have ever been to Alcatraz, even as a tourist. I just don't like the places give me like just the horrible feelings. And then there's places like the Stanley Hotel, which didn't feel horrible, but felt really energetic and weird.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's Penhurst, and it's just such a raw negative energy. I don't know if I would like to necessarily go there ever again. I said that about Alcatraz when I'm going back a year later, but Iron Island is somewhere I think I would probably actually want to go because of that experience.
Yeah, I mean, Iron Island is. It's because it's so unassuming. It's like this weird, just strange museum, and you would never and when I was touring around, when we were doing the baseline, I was like, all right, like this, how crazy can this place be? It's like, maybe 1,800 square feet. Like it's not a huge space. And then that happens, and you're like, this is by far some of the most irrefutable evidence we've ever captured on camera.
It makes you think again, like what the sort of the impetus is to having a museum there. And there may have been a lot of logical decisions, but still it wound up there. And it's kind of like, megalithic structures and things like, landmarks around the world. You kind of, we kind of think that the planning is independent of the experiences that may happen there. And again, it gets back to the conversation I had earlier, where if you think about from the quantum theory perspective, that there is no past, present, future. Everything exists, always has existed, and what existed, what will exist, has existed. So there's an example of a science fiction writer who wrote about stealth technology, and it was literally what was used to create stealth technology. And you say, well, it's not. Maybe that's not coincidence. Maybe that guy wasn't necessarily creating that as much as remembering it in a way. And so.
To bring it to current events, what about that book that was written in like 1981 talking about a virus that comes out of Wuhan that's a coronavirus? Like, what the hell is that?
Yeah. And so again, so it's like, that's the same question. It's always like, it's the butterfly effect, right? We think about time travel as like, well, if you go back, you might influence something. Well, okay, but we don't have to go back. We could look forward, right? The book was written. There's information in there. It's in part of a consciousness now. It's known information that may somewhat influence someone's decision to put a lab in Wuhan and study viruses.
Right.
That it becomes self-fulfilling prophecy in that way. It's wild, right? I mean, it's just this whole world. It get like it get giddy over it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I can start going down rabbit holes big time.
Well, I'm going to go down one after we get off the call on Iron Island. So I appreciate you turning me on to that place. Jack, thanks so much for doing this, man. This was great. I really appreciate it. I had a lot of fun talking to you.
Absolutely.
I feel like we could go on for hours if nobody stops us.
For sure.
All right, that was my interview with Jack Osbourne, Travel Channel's Portals to Hell, which airs Thursdays, 10 p.m., 9 Central on Travel Channel, of course, as I just said. Thanks so much to Travel Channel and to Jack and the Portals to Hell team for allowing me the opportunity to speak with him. It was a great interview, one of my favorites. Definitely someone I could talk to for hours about this sort of thing. So, hey, maybe we'll have him back again in the future. But for now, I'm Mark Marinaccio. This was the Strange Story Podcast. Thanks for listening.